Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Aaron Heslehurst from BBC World News. I'm a news anchor and presenter, and it's an absolute pleasure, an absolute delight to be here with all of you this afternoon, and of course to introduce our keynote speaker, and to have think of this as like, after Brian does a little presentation, think of this as a little fireside chat. Sans the fire, of course. Although given the weather outside, we could have used one perhaps. But before I start, I've got three apologies. First one is, excuse me if I look a little disheveled. I live in West London. You know, getting to Excel Centre, it's a bit of a drag, right? Across London in the morning. I had to be here at 9:30. They gave me two options. They said, we can send a car at 7 a.m. I said, I could fly to Berlin and back for that. Or we could send a limo bike. Have you heard of a limo bike? I'd never heard of a limo bike. So I spent an hour on the back of a motorbike getting in here. It's amazing. It's amazing. It scared the living daylights out of me, but I got here on time. It was brilliant. So that's the one apology. The other apology is the glasses. Glasses are a new thing for me, newish. I've got them on, I've got them off because I can see this, but I can't see you with them on. One thing the BBC has given me over the past 15 years is blindness, which is nice. And the last apology is WTM. What are you doing serving my favorite champagne, free and cold? Have you heard that brand? It's wonderful. It's not good. If I screw up, you can blame the bubbles. Ladies and gentlemen, award-winning author, digital analyst, and futurist, Brian Solis. Give Brian a round of applause.
Thank you.
Brian is a principal analyst studying disruptive technology and its impact on business at Altimeter Group. It's a research firm that was acquired by the global brand management consultancy firm Profit. They acquired that back in 2015. Mm-hmm. Brian studies the impact of emerging technologies on business, on marketing and culture, and in his role, he advises companies on marketing strategy and change management. He's also published quite a few books, many books, just to name a few. The Experience, When Business Meets Design, What's the Future of Business, and The End of Business as Usual. I'll also note, apart from the old print stuff, social media, if you're a big... Brian, as a futurist, and apparently I've learned that this is a big thing, Brian has more than 500,000 followers, all organic, right? All organic. You haven't bought them. You haven't bought them. That's good. So why is Brian here? I asked him, I said, why? Why are you here, Brian? Well, we all know, of course, that travel and tourism, the industry has been radically changed by technology or technological developments, and the pace of change is phenomenal. Of course, accelerating. It's there, it's out there, you can't stop it, you can't escape it. If you don't embrace it, some of you may be goners. So Brian's been doing some work on technology in the travel industry and how it's going to change the booking experience, how it'll change the holiday experience, and of course, perhaps most importantly, the customer's expectations. So before we get stuck into this little fireside chat, a bit of Q&A, and I will come down and, once we get going, I implore you to certainly ask Brian some questions, please, ladies and gentlemen. It is your industry after all. But before that, Brian, I want you to talk to us. I want you to give us your thoughts. I want you to tell us what's going on there, out there at the moment. What's going on out there at the moment that's going to have a big impact on the ladies and gentlemen sitting in front of us. So the lectern is there.
All right.
It's all yours, Brian.
Thank you. Okay. I'm not going to stand behind the lectern, though, because I'm too short and you won't see me. Simon, thank you for having me. It's a big honor to be here. And anytime someone wants to listen, or maybe you're being forced to listen, about trying to change the future, is really important, because I've been studying the future of business and the future of technology for 20 years, and it's just now starting to resonate with people, and it's very inspiring to me. I wrote a book before this one called What's the Future of Business, and I picked that title specifically so I could use the acronym WTF. And the reason why I needed to use that acronym is because that's how I constantly feel when I look at all of the things that are happening in every industry and just how slow everything is moving, even though the writing's been on the wall for a long time that we all need to change. What I've been trying to do in my work is specifically study prominent industries to show with data and behavioral research and trends how you can innovate. And I spent the last year and a half specifically working with Google on researching the travel industry because it was just so stark in how radical it was changing from the consumer's perspective, the technology perspective, from the decision-making perspective, and lastly, from the experiential perspective, which none of it made sense until you really dove deep beyond the data. One of the things that I didn't tell Aaron until right before we got on stage, but I'm also a digital anthropologist. So I study technology's effect on people. It's slower than the rate of innovation on new products and technologies. At the same time as I study people, I'm also studying right now blockchain and autonomous cars and artificial intelligence. But it's the behavior of people that I think is the most inspiring because you can, from a human perspective, understand to what extent we need to innovate, but also to give you the clues and the cues that inspire you to innovate because you're solving with purpose. You have someone that you can see and appreciate, of which then can inspire you to do things differently, whereas then technology, devices, all of these other technologies just become enablers for delivering a better experience the way people want that experience. And this is one of the reasons why there's so much disruption, that you see it in every industry, is because at some point, human expectations and behaviors change, and we just didn't change along with it. I call that digital Darwinism. Technology evolves. Society evolves. The hardest part of that is that the infrastructures of our business, unless we have some leader in the organization who's telling us it's okay to try new things, we work and operate within these confines of business models that have been created 50, 60 years ago that just don't necessarily allow us to keep up, as well as the cultures that maybe make us a little bit more risk averse, that we maybe manage processes to the way that they've always been done. And so I just wanted to share with you some of the thoughts of my perspective, because nothing says innovation like a PowerPoint deck. But it's this lens of which that I think the balance between seeing people and then understanding technology and the relationship of how that affects experiences, I think is a real big opportunity for you. I'll start by saying I'm a hopeless optimist. I see all of this as a threat, of course, but also as an opportunity, because we have a choice. We have a choice in how we see it, and we have a choice in what we do. I think we can all pretty much agree that it's happening. And we all remember a company called Kodak, and we remember that the Kodak moment was one of the most nostalgic things that you could think about, that it would remind you of the pictures you used to take, the moments that you had, the memories that sort of defined your experiences. But now, like most companies that are being disrupted, that Kodak moment now means the moment when you lose sight of how people are changing. Kodak, as you know or may not know, in 1979 had the first patents for digital photography. And in a very famous shareholder meeting, they chose not to actually invest in that technology because they felt it was going to cannibalize their film business, which they were right. But again, it was a choice. Every company in every industry has that choice. Every individual at every company has that choice. And I think that any great story of innovation starts with the story of personal transformation. You have to define to what extent are you willing to do something different tomorrow. And that's the hardest part. I believe that when we have purpose, when we can find reasons to do something different, it gives us a little bit of security, a little bit of safety, and that customer experience, or experience in general, every expert says that that is the next investment for a competitive advantage. If you invest in customer experiences, you will outperform the industry. And so I study this. I have to study this. If this is indeed the advantage for you, what is it? And it turns out that customer experience is something that means a million things to a million different people. What it doesn't mean to most companies that I study, which this is where I think our story can begin, is it doesn't mean, but it should mean, the experience that someone's going to have, rather than thinking about what mobile app should we design, what new products can we create, how are we going to sell them, how are we going to make our website more responsive. Those are parts of the experience, but ultimately what we're talking about is designing the experience that someone's going to have, and therefore we have to understand what type of experience resonates with a new type of customer. Customer experience is not customer service. But the word experience to me is also one of those things that, well, what does that word even mean, right? So customer experience as an industry, as a business trend, sure. But then just look at the word experience. And you start to understand that things like Uber, things like the sharing economy, things like Spotify and people not buying music anymore, all of these things are happening because of the root trend are people using their money for other things than the way we traditionally used our money. We were raised to have sort of this idea of happiness. So go to school, go to university, get married, buy a house, buy 2.3 cars, whatever it is. But that started to change. So at the root of all of this is that people actually want experiences. And they're willing to pay inordinate amounts of money to have something that's almost intangible. And that goes against a lot of sort of business processes and methodologies that are out there. So once you understand what an experience is, I think that that's where inspiration and innovation can begin. An experience is just something that someone feels, that they sense in a moment. That's the core of the travel industry. We're in the experience business. And what I've learned over time is that if we're not designing those experiences for every moment of those experiences, from the beginning to the end, and somewhere in the middle is the actual journey, then we sort of miss how all of this evolution is happening and taking place. Right? If you think just, what is it, maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago, iTunes was the big disruptor in the music business. And Apple itself lost track of what it meant to be ahead of consumer behavior. They let Spotify out-innovate them. And right now there's a lot of discussion about Microsoft starting to out-innovate Apple. Because Apple too is losing sight of what's called human-centered design. Designing the experiences for a society that values things differently than what we think they value. And the other challenging thing is that experiences are so powerful today that every industry, even outside of the travel industry, that delivers an exceptional experience becomes the standard for the experience that people want to have. So now you compete in some ways with Uber, because Uber has changed how someone has an experience with transportation and makes the technology invisible. In fact, Uber's just announced an API, which is a platform that allows outside development on the Uber platform to make it more than a transportation company, so that they can, when you step into the car, it knows your Spotify playlist and it'll start playing your music without you actually having to talk to the driver. So this is why in the startup world, you hear companies describe themselves as, we are the Uber of ... because that's the experiential standard that people want to have. I live in Silicon Valley, and so there's an Uber of everything. I just walk around the corner, hey, we're the Uber of this. I have the Uber of gasoline in Silicon Valley. I can go to this supermarket, I could go to work, I can just leave my car there, and like Uber, I could just hit the app and I'll come back to a full tank of gas. And people will say, Brian, you are absolutely lazy, that's absurd. Why not just go to a station? Because I don't have to. Because I've gotten a great experience, and if it's one precious commodity that we all have, it's time. So the experience of having that delivered to me is now the standard. Where's the Uber of healthcare? Where's the Uber of finance? Where's the Uber of any industry? This is, in every regard, affecting your consumer expectations. The experiences that they want to have are being affected by not just Ubers of the world, but everything of the world. Snapchat, Tinder, all of these services and applications are teaching people that they can have what they want, when they want it, how they want it, right to them. One of the funny studies that I've actually done, I haven't published this, but because of this incredible demand of how people are becoming more connected and empowered and informed, even a bit narcissistic, maybe a bit, I studied how long is too long to wait for Uber before you open a competitor's app like Lyft to see if you could save more time. I recently did this in New York. You know what the number was? I'm not kidding. The number is 4 minutes. If it says 4 minutes or more, you're going to open Lyft to see if you can save a minute or two. This is where we've come. 4 years ago, you had to take a taxi. You were happy to wave your arms until someone stopped for you. And now you can't wait more than 4 minutes for a car that's going to come find you. And this becomes the standard of what consumers hold as just normal. This is their normal. And over time, we have to understand that our normal and their normal are now creating a gap. And for us to understand then what the new normal values is, well, we keep asking them to come to our center, our reference center, our point of how we make decisions about the future, whereas they're starting to develop in their own ways. They're creating their own comfort zones. And the hardest part about innovation is that every time I study it, regardless of the industry, companies see innovation as a cost center, whereas it's an investment. This is why startups can out-innovate big companies all the time, is because they are investments and they have to return that investment. And the only way to do that is to deliver an innovative product or service that's going to beat the existing competition. So when I study how we look at the world, as an analyst and as an anthropologist, I almost feel like at the same time, every time I talk to executives, I have to also become part therapist. Because there's a frustration, either in that they see the world is changing and they can't do anything about it, or they can't actually see the world changing. There's an old philosophical quote that says, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. And we tend to put ourselves in how we look at change. But this picture to me sort of brings to life the challenge we all face. Most executives will see the woman in the front. And that's who we're designing products and services for. That's business models as they exist today, because that's the customer. Because everyone else can't possibly be in that moment. She's the only one in that moment. She's the only one enjoying this. Just look at that smile on her face. Or we can accept that everybody's in this moment, and they're just living that moment their way. In fact, that moment is so wonderful that everyone else has to share it. And so when we see a picture like this, we tend to say, oh, this is exactly what's wrong with society. They can't actually be in the moment. I remember when I used to go to concerts. In my day, we used to watch the live act instead of having our phones out. And then I realized I used the words "in my day," and I'm suddenly my grandparents. It's just a shift in perspective. This is real life. We're not going to change that. Parents in the room who have children that can't put their devices down, that's their life. That's how they communicate. There are human beings on the other side of those screens. We're not going to change it. We can lead it. We can steer it. But the most important part, especially for your world, is that you can create the experiences that someone is going to want to love and share and put a premium on it. It's counterintuitive in many ways, but it just takes a shift in individual perspective to see what's different and what's possible. You could say, look at this selfish woman here in the front, not sharing this magical moment with all of her Facebook friends that couldn't be there. That's where I think all innovation starts, is just honestly a shift in how you see the world and what you're willing to do about it. And if you start looking everywhere around you, you can start seeing aspects of which anchor you to the past. Every day that you use some Microsoft product, you are probably clicking a 3.5-inch floppy disk to save the file because it makes sense. Because some of us used to do that. We know what a 3.5-inch floppy disk is, and that image association makes us feel comfortable. But there's a whole group of consumers in this room that actually think that's a save icon, because they don't actually know what that thing is. So to them, it's just a save icon. And this is exactly the type of world where you stand at a crossroads, that we're making decisions about the future of our businesses and the future of consumer experiences based on the fact that we know what a 3.5-inch floppy diskette is. So when you bring those worlds together, it looks like this. Have you ever seen one of these before? Oh, you 3D printed the save icon. And so then we design these experiences the way someone else needs to see the world. There's also another quote. This is a quote that inspired my book on experience design, which was, "A magazine is an iPad that doesn't work for some people on planet Earth." And it will be that way for the rest of their life. They will actually have to learn what a magazine is, because it was more intuitive to them to just do this. And so we design upgraded magazines rather than rethinking what a blank canvas could accomplish based on what someone else values. And part of that is learning. I think we all need to learn. It's frustrating, too, as an analyst and an author, to realize that I just can't be content with everything that I know now. My only value in society is how much I keep learning and sharing. The real challenge I found, personally and just amongst every industry I've ever studied, is that to get to new places, there's a lot we have to unlearn. The standard of which someone else holds as the value for innovation or the value for something shareable, and what it takes for us to get there, to even appreciate that picture that we saw earlier, takes some unlearning to then actually start to learn. And I want to share with you what that looks like. About 6 or 7 years ago, I came up with this term called Generation C for connected. Not that I was trying to confuse anybody else with millennials and centennials, but what I had found in my research, specifically in studying how people make decisions and also what people value and also what were the common elements of disruption, I found that there was this group of consumers who live active digital lifestyles. So if you have a smartphone, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Tinder, if you use Uber, if you start to use all of these things as part of your daily life without thinking about it, it's just your go-to standard, you started to exhibit similar behaviors, similar interests, but it crossed age groups. There was not a demographic. It wasn't if you were born this year to this year. I found with travel, with buying automobiles, 55, 56-year-olds making similar decision processes as 25-year-olds. And so to me, that was the biggest finding that I could help share with you, is that we are designing now for a growing market of customers that are changing simply because they live connected lifestyles, and that changes their standard, that changes their center, and we see it everywhere, but we don't really see it. And so for every business in the world, understanding this connected behavior of how it spills over into the real world is where all the answers lie. This is an art series where the photographer removes the smartphone from everyday scenarios so that we could just sort of see how pervasive technology is in our lives. I mean, many of us go to bed this way, many of us wake up this way, but I wanted to share it with you as a metaphor for what I call the new market, the ecosystem. Everybody has these devices, and everybody lives on these devices. You share what you're eating on these devices for all to see, and you feel just a little bit bad if you share something so important and you don't actually get a like. You feel like, I got to take another picture. I need that validation. So this market is sort of becoming, I use the word lovingly, of course, self-centered. And those experiences that we design have to cater to this new type of expectation, this new type of behavior, where when we see it, we have to look past judging it. I could do another in my day rhetorics on this picture, right? In my day, we used to actually have the best party ever. But to them, that is the best party ever, right? And they're probably telling everybody that this is the best party ever. And for us, they say, how could it be the best party if you're not actually at the party? But they are at the party. So then we're not going to change that. But there's something on that screen that has their attention, and it's, for them, important. So what is that? What is that magnetism? What inspires that behavior? How do we become part of it? Because it's not going backwards. This is a real sidewalk in China. It is only going to continue to progress. I have executives who will see my work and say, Brian, don't you think all of this is a little bit too much? Do you think at some point we're going to need digital detox? That we'll all sort of realize that technology is maybe almost imprisoning us. And I want to say, you're right. I keep my rotary telephone in a box nearby just in case that day comes. I don't say that. I say something more along the lines of, that's a really good question. I think we could use a bit more philosophy in business. We should have this conversation more often. No, actually, it's not going to go backwards. It's going to become, we can't even imagine all the possibilities. So all we can do is understand it and try to get in front of it. Because once someone tastes a great experience, they don't want to go backwards. And if you think about what the center of all of these great experiences are, all of these technologies, it's you. You are at the center of all of this. That's the standard. And that's changing what was the normal for the travel industry. You think about even things like Marriott and Hilton and the Hyatts of the world. They used to just sell based on expectations of this routine. And now Airbnb comes along because they didn't invent that behavior, they just represented the culmination of these new behaviors. That's what we have to see. And in Airbnb's case, they use data as a way of not only understanding these trends, they also brought in, as quite a remarkable story, they also brought in a storyboard artist from Disney to bring data to life so that they could humanize how these trends were happening, because the data just couldn't allow them to feel that, well, that's not me, I go to the Marriott. Therefore, I can dismiss all of this behavior. But when you can humanize it, you can actually understand that how you define value and how someone else defines value are indeed becoming increasingly distant. And the word relevance and the ability to earn relevance closes that gap. So that means we have to actually conform to how markets are shifting rather than forcing markets to conform to what we think they want. And that's what I call this sort of relevance gap, but this relevance revolution is what we think they want versus what they actually want, or don't know what they want, but then they have to have it once they taste it. That means we have to start asking different questions. We have to start looking to different places. We have to look outside of our industry for inspiration. We can't just follow what other companies are doing. We have to see, well, okay, if this is my target consumer or my target customer, what else in their life is disrupting their behavior? Why do they use Spotify? Why do they use Uber? Why do they use all of these services? And what is it about that they love? And how can I take these insights and build them into the experiences that people want? And how do I realize that the entire experience is something that happens before a trip and after a trip? And how do I bring that to life in a more meaningful way? How do I become part of their life? And this is where I believe that the future of travel and the future of any industry really that touches another human being is experience design. Those experiences have to be designed. Not just the trip or the package that you sell, but every bit around that decision for it and how they find it. So I'll leave you with this. Innovation is a personal journey as much as it is a company journey. If we're waiting for someone to tell us what to do, we're on the wrong side of innovation. The greatest stories of change and transformation have always started simply because we decided it was okay to see something differently and to do something differently. And I know that's hard and it's easier said than done, but it's happening. And this is the step that helps your companies become future-proof. Just because that's how we've always done it is not something a successful entrepreneur will ever say. And it's too easy to find every reason why we cannot do something. Budget, regulation, compliance, resources. But people are finding ways to do this because that's the only way to innovate. And this is a great time and a great opportunity to write the future because it's unwritten. It's almost like disrupt or be disrupted. But I actually, as an optimist, believe that a shift in perspective will allow you to see and do things differently. And that's where this story begins. So thank you very much.
Great, Brian. Brian Solis, ladies and gentlemen, come and grab a seat.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Brian, I spent a day prepping for about 30, 40 minutes of questions. What you've done is you've left me with 15 minutes. This is great. So if we can be brief on some of the answers, and then I can also come down in the audience, and we've got roaming microphones if anybody has any questions. Can we start with this? About 6 weeks ago on one of my shows, I did an interview with Dell. It was a part of the Dell Group. They did a global survey, 16,000 people, or 16,000 corporations across many industries. CEO level. One of the outstanding numbers that struck me, 48% of the CEOs said, and this is, I thought it was astonishing, 48% said, I don't know what my industry is going to look like in 3 years, just 3 years. I do not know what my industry is going to look like. Does that surprise you, and does that mean some people here could be in trouble?
Well, so yes, that number surprises me that it's so low. I actually would have expected it to be much higher. So that means that some people are lying. I think they falsely assume where their industry is going to be in 3 years. And the challenge is, and I study this under the guise of what's called digital transformation. The challenge is that it's almost impossible for any executive to actually be able to answer that question of where the industry is going to be in 3 years, is because that's not their job. Their job is to manage the infrastructure for scale, profitability, and also when we talk about customer centricity, the reality is that we might say we're customer centric, but we're actually shareholder centric. Quarter by quarter. So I could tell you what the next quarter might look like. 3 years from now is impossible, and I think that's part of the governing model of which holds businesses back.
So that mindset can't exist in this digital transformation, this digital revolution, surely. Surely they've got to go beyond a quarter and even another quarter.
It's hard because psychologically they feel that if they can just perform in quarter by quarter, that's how they're rewarded for doing their work. So it's unless someone comes along and says it's okay not to think about shareholder value and maybe think about innovation as an investment and not a cost center. Otherwise,
but that's a tough job, right? That's a tough job to go to shareholders and go, listen, we're not going to tell you, we're not going to report quarter by quarter, and we're going to take some losses. I mean, Unilever, you and I were talking, right? Yep. Unilever is a good example of doing the opposite, right?
Well, the CEO of Unilever, quite famously and quite shockingly, told his shareholders that if you were in for the short term, they want you out. And that they were going to change how they report their earnings, and that they were completely upfront that they were going to start taking losses because it wasn't about competing for the quarter, that they were competing for 5, 6, 10 years from now, and that those were going to take some very solid investments. And there's also a move outside of this in Silicon Valley right now to start an alternative to NASDAQ for long-term shareholders.
Wow, okay.
That's how incredible disruption is.
So we'll keep our eyes on that. Let's talk about the disruptors.
Yes.
I just came back from an IATA event in Dubai, World Passenger Symposium. Straight after that, it was Air Passenger Experience Expo in Singapore, and the chairing and moderating events. And the key topic on all my panel sessions were the disruptors. The theme of disruption, digital revolution. 2 years ago, wouldn't have been on the agenda. So you mentioned the names, right? The big disruptors we know, Airbnb. Do you know Airbnb doesn't own, we know that, doesn't own any bricks or mortar. Has a market value of $32 billion. The closest comparison in terms of accommodation is the largest hotel group in the world, Hilton Hotel Group, owns what, 1,000 plus bricks and mortar, if you will. It's valued at $24 billion. Uber is valued at around $65 billion, doesn't own a single car, if you will. The closest transport group is Delta Airlines, with what, 1,200 aircraft, I think, or something like that, valued at about $32 billion. Does it take an outside, can this industry be its own, if they collaborate, can it be a disruptor itself, or does it take an outsider to be a disruptor?
So I love this question because it can take an insider, as long as they feel as an individual that it's okay to challenge the convention of which when you go to work, that you can be the inside disruptor, right? But yeah, often, if you look at the automotive industry, the entire autonomous movement for self-driving cars started because of Google. They're not in the car business. If you look at the future of autonomous transport, that's Uber. They just bought a trucking company that is going to be the first ever autonomous trucking. They just did one with Budweiser for the delivery to demonstrate the technology. They have autonomous cars driving in Pittsburgh right now to test this. So yes, the outsiders are showing that this is possible. If you can indulge me for 30 seconds, one of the things that I found that's the root cause of this is that we actually, when we invest in new technology in our work today, we actually think that that's being innovative. But it's not. It's actually being iterative. And I just wanted to make this distinction because it's actually, if you can take this back with you and you ask yourself, which one of these things is what I'm doing? There's iteration, which I define as doing the same things better. So when we make an app, we are making the existing experience better because we put out a mobile app. Innovation is doing new things that unlocks new value. So Airbnb is an innovation that unlocked an entire industry that nobody saw. Only one of those two things leads to disruption, and I feel like we have to put a definition on disruption because we kind of throw that word around a lot. Disruption is doing new things that makes the old things obsolete. And this is why they are so disruptive, is because for most people, once you use an Uber, it is psychologically impossible for you to think about using a taxi again. The idea of paying electronically, it starts to even challenge your convention of whether or not you need cash, right? So making the old things obsolete, that's disruption.
So if we look at because you've done the work in this industry, if we look at this industry, are they doing enough, if you will, compared to other industries that you have worked with and for?
If it's one thing that I can share, and hopefully this helps you, or at least offers some comfort, is that no industry as a whole has figured this out. Not at all. And in my research with Google, one of the reasons why I do that is because rather than tell you the world is changing, what I try to do are find the answers of here's what to go do about it. And if you find yourself with some extra time, please Google micro moments and my name. And there you will get access to all kinds of free research that we published specific to the travel industry and every industry, so you can take inspiration from it, that shows you exactly how consumers are changing and exactly how they're making decisions differently. And how, for example, something like 75% of travel amongst connected customers today is made based upon what they find on YouTube. Well, all kinds of really incredible things, and then what to do about it. And so the answers are there.
It's a question I would have asked you later, but because of time's ticking away, what should the executives in this room then, taking everything into account, be investing in going forward?
Well, one of the most effective and promising trends that I'm seeing right now are the creation of almost like startups within the organization. So whether they're external so that they can operate in their own culture, or they're internals because that's just all we can do right now, they have to be free to actually try to challenge the convention. And a lot of this is counterintuitive. You have to empower this group of people to try to put you out of business and reward them for trying rather than rewarding them just for succeeding. This is what all of the greatest companies around the world, whether startups or enterprises, they're starting to reward new types of behavior to incite new behavior. And that's what I think that's a good place to start.
You mentioned earlier customer expectation, and it's something that I raise even amongst the airline industry. Is that awfully? I mean, sometimes the industry is between a rock and a hard place. It's very difficult. Well, okay, let me put it this way: is this an industry that plans and acknowledges and works ahead of what the customer expectation is, or does it react instantly? Because the customer expectation seems nowadays to just be constantly changing, and the demands are constantly evolving.
The demands are constantly evolving. Every industry reacts, and then gets caught up in iteration versus innovation. It's just a natural reaction. the more you could look outside of your industry, the better off you're going to be. It allows you to see things with a fresher perspective. I study innovation as ways of trying to inspire innovation in other industries. And I mean, for every Snapchat that exists in the world, you change behavior that much more. It just takes a little while to play out. But the more you're looking on these horizons, the better it is that you'll come up with the nuances or the cues of which we'll say, you know what if we did this? And questions like that, what if? That's where this begins. Because then you can start asking, and one other thing that I'll just say, when someone asks, what if we can do this? Let them try to answer it. Just because you might be the highest paid person in the room, you're part of the problem. Because that creates fear. Listen to the younger people that work for you. Look outside of your industry. Be the highest paid person in the room because you're willing to take ideas from the most uncanny of sources.
Talking about outside your industry, you've led me very nicely into this. What's the best disruptive innovation that you've seen in other industries that you would like to see applied in this industry?
Well, naturally, it's easy to say Uber and Airbnb, and I'm sure you hear those terms 1,000 times, right? But I think about what Spotify has done to the entire music industry. Do you realize that we're the last generation of consumers that will ever have paid for music? It's just now part of life that should be free. That, to me, was one of the greatest disruptions because it has completely upset the value of music. And if something like that is possible in our lifetime, we have a lot to learn. And the thing about Spotify, and I was surprised that Apple didn't see this, is it wasn't overnight. It played out over years and years and years. And it started with Napster. And our natural reaction to that was shut it down. I have a lot of friends in the music industry. They partied like it was 1999 when they shut down Napster. All that did was spark change.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any questions in the audience for Brian? I've got plenty more, but I just wanted to see. They're shy, Brian. They're very, very shy. They're soaking it all up. Okay, no questions. To innovate, and again, it's a subject that I've raised with the airline industry. In the airline industry, I think if those of you who are within the industry will say, and I've heard this in nearly 20 years that I've been doing airline events, they're not really good at sharing. The collaboration thing is not really that good. But to innovate, you need to collaborate. As an industry, you need to collaborate.
Well, yeah.
Does the airline aside, does the rest of the travel industry, that you know of, are they good at collaborating?
I don't think any industry is good at collaborating because it's counterintuitive, right?
Apart from the autonomous vehicles, which we'll talk about in a second.
That's exactly right. So that's what I was about to share, is that there is a great example of what's happening in the autonomous industry right now, is that car manufacturers have agreed to share the data from all of their private tests that they're doing for their self-driving car projects. Road conditions, weather, what happens with behavior in trees and sunlight, because the only way that they've figured out how to catch up to Google, who has years and years of data on self-driving cars, is to share the data with each other. And they feel like if they can do that, then the data doesn't become the competitive advantage. The self-driving experience becomes then what each can invest in to become competitive. But just getting there means that we can all get our cars to market faster if we all share this data.
Okay. A lot of people have meetings and other things to go on to for this afternoon, but can we leave? You've sort of touched on a few points here, but let's leave with this quote. The secret. Is there a secret to innovation? Or what are the secrets to innovation?
This could be an hour, but I will say this, that the secret to innovation is to recognize that it's not something that's just for entrepreneurs or startups, that everybody could be innovative. It's not just something you're born with. You can learn the skills as long as you, one, want to, and then two, encourage it around you. And that changes sort of the idea of management and work. And that's the easiest and hardest step, but that, yes, everybody's responsible for it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Solis.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you. Short and sweet, but thank you. We appreciate it. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope you have a very successful WTM 2016.